Well, hello, everybody. I've got some pretty exciting stuff here for you today. I've mentioned Robert Monroe quite a bit on this channel. Wonderful author, wonderful human being, um, and he discusses out of body experiences and remote viewing techniques. And this is actually a declassified document from the military, and I'll leave a link to it in the description or in a comment. And this is from CIA.gov, um, of an officer that actually went through the Gateway program at the Monroe Institute back in the early 1980s. Uh, so I'm just going to actually read this for you so you can hear it for yourself. A lot of people don't like to read these things, so I'll just do my best to carry you along on this journey. Um, it says, you asked me to provide an assessment of the Gateway experience in terms of its mechanics and ultimate practicality. As I set out to fulfill that tasking, it soon became clear that in order to assess the validity of the practicality of this process, I needed to do enough supporting research and analysis to fully understand how and why the process works. Frankly, sir, that proved to be an extremely involved and difficult business, initially based on conversations with a physician who took the Gateway training with me. I had recourse to the biomedical models developed by Istok Bentov to obtain information concerning the physical aspects of the process. Then I found it necessary to dive into the various sources of information concerning quantum mechanics in order to be able to describe the nature and functioning of the human consciousness. I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonable lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemisphere synchronization technique employed by Gateway. Once this was done, the next step involved recourse to theoretical physics in order to explain the character of time-space dimension and the means by which expanded human consciousness transcends it in achieving Gateway's objectives. Finally, I again found it necessary to use physics to bring the whole phenomenon of out-of-body states into the language of physical science to remove the stigma of its occult connotations and put it into the frame of reference suited to the objective assessment. I begin the narrative by briefly profiling the fundamental biomedical factors affecting such related techniques as hypnosis, biofeedback, and transcendental meditation, so that their objectives and mode of functioning could be compared to the reader's mind in the Gateway experience as the model of its underlying mechanics was developed. Additionally, that introductory model is useful in supporting the conclusions of the paper. I indicate that at this time, these related techniques may provide useful entry points to accelerate movement into the Gateway experience. Niels Bohr, the renowned physicist, and once responded to his son's complaints about the obtuse nature of certain concepts in physics by saying, "You are not thinking, you are merely being logical." The physics of altered human consciousness deals with some conceptualizations that are not easily grasped or visualized conclusively in the context of ordinary left brain linear thinking. So to borrow from Dr. Bohr's mode of expressions, part of this paper will require not only logic, but a touch of right brain intuitive insight to achieve the complete, comfortable grasp of the concepts involved. Nevertheless, once that is done, I am confident that their construction and application will stand up to the test of rational critique. Paradoxically, having gone to such great lengths to render judgments based on a cult or dogmatic frame of reference, in the end I found it was necessary to return, at least briefly, to the question of the impact of the Gateway experience on common belief systems. I did so because although it was essential to avoid attempting to render an assessment of the context of such systems, I felt that it was necessary after having completed the analysis to point out that the resulting conclusions do not any let me see, lost my place. Do not do any violence to the fundamental mainstreams, either Eastern or Western belief systems. Unless that point is clearly established, the danger exists that some people reject the whole concept of the Gateway experience in the mistaken belief that it contradicts and is therefore alien to all that they hold to be right and true. This study is certainly not designed to be the last word on the subject. I hope that the validity of the basic structure and of the fundamental concepts upon which it is based will make it a useful guide for other USA NSCOM personnel who are required to take the Gateway training for work with the Gateway materials. Wayne M. McDonald, Lieutenant Colonel. So this is pretty interesting. That's just kind of the intro. He was asked to go through this. I think it's pretty cool, that he got chosen to test this out. And it ties in a lot to the Stargate project and the remote viewing, and they were basically looking for a means to further develop remote viewing because it did show some success. And they wanted to use Robert Monroe's HemiSync program to potentially develop this without any kind of religious or woo-woo, if you will, means. Going to jump into this next part. The Gateway experience, brain hemisphere synchronization in perspective. Introduction. In order to describe the Monroe Institute technique for achieving altered states of consciousness, the Gateway experience, involving brain hemisphere synchronization or HemiSync, the most effective way to begin is to briefly profile the basic mechanics which underlay operation of the relayed methods such as hypnosis, transcendental meditation, and biofeedback. It is easiest to effectively describe the Gateway is by beginning with a short description of those associated techniques that share some common aspects with Gateway experience, but which are nevertheless different. In this way, they can develop a frame of reference at the outset of which will provide useful concepts to explain and understand the Gateway by comparison as we proceed. Hypnosis. According to the theories of psychologist Ronald Stone and the biomedical engineering models of Bentov, hypnosis is basically a technique which permits acquisition of direct access to the sensory motor cortex and pleasure centers and lower cerebral cortex, or lower cerebral emotion portions and associated pleasure centers of the right side of the human brain following successful disengagement of the stimulus screening function of the left hemisphere of the brain. The left hemisphere of the brain is a self-cognitive, verbal, and linear reasoning component of the mind. It fulfills the function of screening incoming stimuli by categorizing, assessing, and assigning meaning prior to allow passage to the right hemisphere of the mind. The right hemisphere, which functions as the non-critical, holistic, nonverbal, and pattern-oriented component of the brain, appears to accept what the left hemisphere passes to it without question. Consequently, if the left hemisphere can be distracted either through boredom, through reduction to a soporific semi-sleep state, external stimuli, to include hypnotic suggestions, are allowed to pass unchallenged to the right hemisphere, where they are accepted and acted upon directly. The result may involve an emotional reaction originating in the lower cerebral region, sensory motor responses requiring involvement of the cortex, and so on. Both the sensory and the motor cortices of the right cerebral portion of the brain contain a sequence of points known as the homunculus, which corresponds to the points of the body. See Exhibit 1 on the next page. And let's just go on to that. So you've got the Exhibit 1. And just kind of show you here, it's kind of going through the outline. I think you can see it and understand it for yourself. It's a little bit hard to read some of these. Let's see here. Go back to where we were. Simulation of the corresponding area of the cortex causes immediate response in the associated portion of the body. Consequently, induction of the suggestion that the left leg is numb. If it reaches the right hemisphere unchallenged, it is referred to the appropriate area of the sensory cortex, will result in an electrical reaction being generated that will induce the feeling of numbness. Similarly, The suggestion that the person is experiencing a general feeling of happiness and well-being would be referred to the appropriate general feeling of happiness and well-being. Oh, skipped a line. Pleasure centers located in the lower cerebral region portion of the cortex of the right hemisphere, thereby inducing the suggested feeling of euphoria. Finally, suggestions such as the one that informs the hypnotic subject that he enjoys enhanced concentration or powers of memory would be responded to in the right hemisphere by accessing unused information storage capacity normally held in reserve as a result of left hemisphere selection and control processes. This aspect will become significant in the context of the gateway process when the attention is given to examining the way the hypnosis may be used to accelerate progress in the early stages of the gateway experience. Kundalini psychosis or transcendence states that the standing acoustical waves are the result of the altered rhythm of the heart sounds, which are occasioned by prolonged practice of meditation, and which set up sympathetic vibrations in the walls of the fluid-filled cavities, which comprise of the third and lateral ventrices of the brain. In addition, according to Bentov, the states of bliss described in those whose Kundalini symptoms have completed the full loop along the hemispheres may be explained as self-stimulation of the pleasure centers in the brain caused by circulation of a current along the sensory cortex. Bentov also notes that the most of the described symptoms start with the left side of the body, which means that it is mostly a development occurring in the right hemisphere. Although normally a period of meditation involving intense concentration and practice for 5 years or some is required to bring up the Kundalini, Bentov states that exposure to mechanical or acoustical vibrations in the range of 4 to 7 Hz cycles per second for the protracted periods may achieve the same effect. Bentov cites as an example repeated riding in a car whose suspension and seat combination produce that range of vibrations, or being exposed for long periods of time to these frequencies caused, for instance, by an air conditioning duct. He also notes that the cumulative effect of these vibrations may be able to trigger a spontaneous physio-kundalini sequence in a susceptible people that have a particularly sensitive nervous system. Biofeedback, the third consciousness altering methodology, which will be briefly described as biofeedback. Biofeedback is somewhat unique in that it actually employs the self-cognitive powers of the left hemisphere to gain access to such areas of the right brain as the lower cerebral, motor, and sensory cortices, and the assorted pain and pleasure centers. Instead of suppressing the left hemisphere as is done in hypnosis or largely bypassing and ignoring it as done in transcendental meditation, biofeedback teaches the left hemisphere first to visualize the desired result and then to recognize the feelings associated with the experience of successful right hemisphere access to the specific lower cerebral cortex, pain pleasure center, or other areas and manner needed to produce desired result. Special self-monitoring devices such as digital thermometer are used to inform the left brain when it succeeds in keying the right hemisphere into accessing the appropriate area. Once this is done, the left brain can then repeatedly instruct the right brain to reestablish the pathways involved so as to produce the same external objective measures of success. In this way, the pathways are strengthened and emphasized to such an extent that the left brain consciousness is enabled to access appropriate areas in the right brain using a conscious demand mode. For example, if the subject wishes to increase the circulation in the left leg in order to speed up healing, he may concentrate with his left brain on achieving that result while carefully monitoring a digital thermometer connected to the left leg. When the concentrated effort begins to achieve success, the digital thermometer will register an increase in temperature on the left leg. At that point, the subject can mentally left brain associate the sensations experienced with the result achieved and begin to emphasize by memory recall the same process to cause its strengthening by affirmation and repetition. In this way, pain can be blocked, healing can be enhanced, malignant tumors can apparently be suppressed and ultimately destroyed, the body's pleasure centers can be stimulated, and a variety of specific physiological results may be achieved. In addition, biofeedback may be used to greatly accelerate achievement in deep meditative states, particularly for beginners who have no experience in meditative techniques and whose progress in that methodology is enhanced through effective visualization and external objective affirmation. Display of the subject's brainwaves pattern on a cathode ray Display of the subject's brainwave pattern on a cathode ray tube has proven to be a laboratory validated means by which subjects may quickly learn to place themselves in profoundly relaxed states characterized by the sort of quietude and singularity of mental focus associated with advanced meditation. Gateway and hemisync. Now that we have briefly profiled the basic mechanics of principal techniques for altering or expanding consciousness, which share some of the objectives and or methods employed in the gateway experience, we may proceed to focus on what that technique actually involves. Fundamentally, the gateway experience is a training system designed to bring an enhanced strength, focus, and coherence to the amplitude and frequency of the brainwave output between the left and right hemispheres, so as to alter consciousness, moving it to the outside physical sphere, so as to ultimately escape even the restrictions of time and space. The participant then gains access to various levels of intuitive knowledge which the universe offers. What differentiates the gateway experience from forms of meditation is that its use of hemisync technique, which is defined in a monograph by Monroe Institute trainer Melissa Yeager, a state of consciousness defined when the EEG patterns of both hemispheres are simultaneously equal in amplitude and frequency. Although hemisync seems to be rather rare and only short duration in ordinary human consciousness, Melissa Yeager states that audio techniques developed by Bob Monroe can induce and sustain hemisync with the Institute's basic Focus 3 tapes. She also notes that studies conducted by Elmer and Alice Green at the Menninger Foundation have shown that the subject with 20 years of training in Zen meditation could consistently establish hemisync at will, sustaining it for over 15 minutes. Dr. Stuart Tremlow, a psychiatrist and a research associate for the Monroe Institute, reports that in our studies of the effect of the Monroe tape system on brain waves, we have found that the tapes encourage the focusing of brain energy. It can be measured as with a light bulb in watts into a narrower and narrower frequency band. This focusing of energy is not unlike what the yoga concept of one-pointedness, which we may translate into the Western term as single-mindedness. Dr. Tremlow goes on to observe that the individual gets into these tapes beyond Focus 3. There is a gradual increase in brainwave size, which is a measure of brainwave energy or power. Lamp versus laser. Melissa Yeager uses the metaphor to help clarify the process involved in the use of hemisync in the gateway experience. She points that the human mind in its natural state may be likened to an ordinary lamp which expends energy in the form of both heat and light in a chaotic, incoherent way which diffuses its energy over a wide area of rather limited depth. On the other hand, the human mind under discipline of hemisync acts after the fashion of a laser beam which produces a disciplined stream of light. The stream of energy is a stream of energy projected with total coherence of both frequency and amplitude such that the surface area of the laser beam contains billions of times the concentrated energy found in similar surface area on the sun. Gateway assumes that once the frequency and amplitude of the human brain are rendered coherent, it is possible to begin accelerating both so that the human mind is soon resonating at even higher vibrational levels. The mind can then bring itself into the synchronization with more sophisticated and rarefied energy levels in the universe. The mind, when operating at these increasingly rarefied levels, is assumed to be capable of processing the information thus received through the same fundamental matrix of which it makes sense to ordinary physical sensory input to achieve meaning in a cognitive context. Such meaning is usually perceived visually in the form of symbols, but it may also be perceived as astonishing flashes of holistic intuition or even in the form of scenarios involving both visual and oral perception. The mechanics by which this mind exercise the consciousness functions will be addressed in more detail later in this paper. Frequency following response. To achieve synchronization of the brain hemispheres, the hemisync techniques take advantage of the phenomenon known as frequency following response, FFR, which means that if a subject hears a sound produced at frequency which emulates one of those associated with the operation of the human brain, the brain will try to mimic the same frequency pattern by adjusting its brainwave output. Therefore, if the subject is fully awake state but hears sound frequency which approximates brainwave input at the theta level, the subject's brain will endeavor to alter its brainwave pattern from the normal beta to theta level. Since the theta level is associated with sleep, the subject concerned may progress from a fully awake to a sleep state, provided that he does not consciously resist. As the brain strives to entrain its wave frequency output with the one which the person hears, since these brainwave frequencies are outside the spectrum of sound which can be heard in pure form by the human ear, hemisync must produce them based on another phenomenon known as the brain's capacity for deducting beat frequencies. If the human brain is exposed to one frequency in the left ear, which is at 10 hertz below another audible frequency played in the right ear, rather than hearing either of the two audible frequencies, the brain chooses to hear the difference between them, the beat frequency, thus availing itself of the FFR phenomenon. In using this technique of beat frequencies, the gateway system uses hemisync and other audio techniques employing FFR phenomenon to introduce a variety of frequencies which are played at a virtually subliminal, marginally audible level. The objective is to relax the left hemisphere of the brain, place the physical body in a virtual sleep state, and bring the left and right hemispheres into a coherence under conditions designed to promote the production of a higher amplitude and frequency of brainwave output. Audible and perhaps subliminal suggestions by Bob Monroe accompany the various brainwave frequencies, which are sometimes rolled in together with other sounds such as sea surf to mask the sound frequencies where desirable. In this way, Gateway endeavors to provide the subject with the tools by which he may alter his consciousness based on his own volition over time through the repetitive use of the tapes so as to access via intuitive means new categories of information not available to ordinary consciousness. Role of resonance. However, brain coherence through entertainment to beat frequencies introduced via stereo headphones is only part of the reason why the gateway system works. It is also designed to achieve the physical quietude characteristic of deep transcendental meditative states, which brings about a complete alteration of the fundamental resonance pattern associated with the sound frequencies produced by the human body. Yoga, Zen, or transcendental meditation, if practiced long enough, will produce the change in the sound frequency with which the human heart resonates throughout the entire body. According to Bentov, this change in resonance results from the elimination of what medical professionals call the bifurcation echo, so that the sound of the heartbeat can move synchronously up and down the circulatory system in harmonious resonance approximately 7 times a second. Bentov describes the role played by the bifurcation echo as follows. When the left ventricle of the heart ejects blood to the aorta, being elastic, balloons out just beyond the valve and causes a pressure pulse to travel along the aorta. When the pressure pulse reaches the bifurcation in the lower abdomen, which is where the aorta goes into the legs, part of the pressure pulse rebounds and starts traveling up the aorta. In the meantime, the heart ejects more blood and a new pressure pulse is traveling down. These two pressure points will eventually collide somewhere along the aorta and produce an interference pattern. By placing the body in a sleep-like state, the gateway tapes achieved the same goal. Meditation, as meditation, it places the body in such a profoundly relaxed state that bifurcation echo slowly fades away as the heart lessens the force and frequency with which it pushes blood into the aorta. This results in a regular rhythmic sine wave pattern of sound which echoes throughout the body and rises up into the head and sustained resonance. The amplitude of this sine wave pattern, when measured with the sensitive seismograph type instrument, is about 3 times the average of the sound volume produced by the heart when it is operating normal. Consciousness and energy. Before our explanation can proceed any further, it is essential to define the mechanism by which the human mind exercises the function known as consciousness, and to describe the way that which consciousness operates to deduce meaning from the stimuli which it receives. To do this, we will first consider the fundamental character of the material world in which we have our physical existence in order to accurately perceive the raw stuff with our consciousness must work. Let me see here. The first point which needs to be made is that the two terms, matter and energy, tend to be misleading if taken to indicate the two distinctly different states of existence in the physical world that we know it. Indeed, if the term matter is taken to mean solid substance as opposed to energy, which is understood to mean as a force of some sort, then the use of the former is entirely misleading. Science now knows that both the electrons which spin in the energy field located around the nucleus of the atom and the nucleus itself are made up of nothing more than oscillating energy grids. Solid matter, in the strict construction of the term, simply does not exist. Rather, atomic structure is composed of oscillating energy grids surrounded by other oscillating energy grids which orbit at extraordinarily high speeds. In his book, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, Bentov gives the following figures. The energy grid, which composes the nucleus of the atom, vibrates at approximately 10 to the 22nd hertz, which means 10 followed by 22 zeros. At 70 degrees Fahrenheit, an atom oscillates at a rate of 10 to the 15 hertz. An entire molecule composed of the number of atoms bound together in a single energy field vibrates in the range of 10 to the 9 hertz. A live human cell vibrates at approximately 10 to the 3 hertz. The point to be made is that the entire human being, brain, consciousness, and all is, like the universe which surrounds him, nothing more or less than extraordinarily complex systems of energy fields. The so-called status of matter are actually variances in the state of energy, and the human consciousness is a function of the interaction of energy in two opposite states, motion versus rest, in a manner described in the following paragraph. Holograms. Energy creates, stores, and retrieves meaning in the universe by projecting or expanding a certain frequency in three-dimension mode that creates a living pattern called a hologram. The concept of the hologram can be most easily understood by using an example cited by Bentov in which he asks the reader to visualize a full bowl of water into which 3 pebbles are dropped. As the ripples created by the simultaneous entry of the 3 pebbles radiate outward towards the rim of the bowl, Bentov further asks his reader to visualize that the surface of the water is suddenly flash frozen so that the ripple pattern is preserved instantly. The ice is removed, leaving the three pebbles still laying at the bottom of the bowl. Then the ice is exposed to a powerful, coherent source of light, such as a laser. The result will be a three-dimensional model or representation of the position of the three pebbles suspended in midair. Holograms are capable of coding so much detail that, for example, it is possible to take a holographic projection of a glass of swamp water and view it under magnification to see small organisms not visible to the naked eye when the glass of water itself is examined. The whole concept of holography, despite its scientific implications, has only been known to the physicists since the underlying mathematical principle were worked out by Dennis Gaber in 1947. He later won a Nobel Prize for this work. Laboratory demonstrations of Gaber's work only occurred years later following the invention of the laser. As biologist Lyle Watson explains, the purest kind of light available to us is produced by the laser, which sends out a beam in which all the waves are of one frequency, like those made of an ideal pebble in a perfect pond. When two laser beams touch, they produce an interference pattern of light and dark ripples that can be recorded on a photographic plate. And if one of the beams, instead of becoming directly from the laser, is reflected first off an object such as a human face, the resulting pattern would be very complex indeed, but it would still be recorded. The record will be of the hologram of the face. The part encodes the whole. Of further importance, it is the fact that even if we dropped our frozen hologram into the ripple pattern onto the floor and it broke into a number of pieces, each individual piece would recreate the entire holographic image all by itself. The smaller the piece, the fuzzier and more distorted would be, resulting in the holographic projection, but the fact remains that the whole projection would nonetheless be made. The key to creating any hologram is that the energy in motion must interact with energy in a state of rest, non-motion. In the foregoing example, the pebbles represent energy in motion, while the water before its agitation by the pebbles represents energy at a state of rest. To activate, or in effect to perceive the meaning of the holograph energy, in this case coherent light source, such as a laser beam, must be passed through the interference pattern generated by the interaction between the moving energy and the energy at rest. In the simple example given by Bentov, this requirement was fulfilled by holding a frozen interference pattern in front of the coherent light to project the three-dimensional holographic image, its meaning, into space. As Marilyn Ferguson, editor of the Brain Mind Bulletin, tells us, another feature of the hologram is that its efficiency. Billions of bits of information can be stored in a tiny space. The pattern of the holographic photograph is stored everywhere on the plate. The consciousness matrix. The universe is composed of interacting energy fields, some at rest, some in motion. It is, and of itself, one gigantic hologram of unbelievable complexity. According to the theories of Carl Pilgrim, a neuroscientist at Stanford University, and David Bohm, a physicist at the University of London, the human mind is also a hologram which attunes itself to the universal hologram by a medium of energy exchange, thereby deducing meaning and achieving the state which we call consciousness. With respect to the states of expanded or altered consciousness, such as Gateway uses, the process operates in the following way. As energy passes through the various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by the electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon those electrostatic fields of the mind. Electrostatic fields of the mind are being perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic field is operating at a frequency and amplitude that can harmonize and therefore read the energy carrier wave pattern passing through it. Changes in frequency and amplitude of the electrostatic field which comprises the human mind determines the configuration and hence the character of the holographic energy matrix, which the mind projects to intercept meaning directly from the holographic transmissions of the universe. Then, to make sense of the holographic image is saying to it, the mind proceeds to compare the image just received with itself. Specifically, it does this by comparing the image of the received with that part of its own hologram which constitutes memory. By registering differences in geometric form and energy frequency, the consciousness perceives. See Exhibit 2, next page. Alright, so let's look at that. Left hemisphere consciousness grid acts like the mind's computer software to reduce input from the right hemisphere to verbal symbols and concepts. Right hemisphere consciousness grid reduces three-dimensional holographic image to two-dimensional no. Can't read that. Let me see here. Back to where we're at. All right. Contrary to what everyone knows is so, it may not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness that creates the appearance of the brain. Brain in phase. The consciousness process is most easily envisaged if we picture a holographic input with three-dimensional grid system superimposed over it, and such that all the energy patterns contained within can be described in terms of three-dimensional geometry, using mathematics to reduce the data to two-dimensional form. Bentov states that the scientists suspect that human mind operates on a simple binary go-no-go system, as do all digital computers. Therefore, once it is superimposed at a three-dimensional matrix over holographic information, it wishes to interpret and reduce that information mathematically to two-dimensional form. It can completely process it using its fundamental binary system, just as any computer made by the hand of man can process volumes of data and make various comparisons between the data and information stored within the digital memory. Our minds operate in the same way, perceiving by comparison only. Bentov states that the proposition this way, our whole reality is constructed by constantly mixing such comparisons. Whenever we perceive something, we always perceive differences only. In states of expanded consciousness, the right hemisphere of the human brain, in its holistic, nonlinear, nonverbal mode of functioning, acts as a primary matrix or receptor for this holographic input, while operating in the phase or coherence with the right brain. The left hemisphere provides the secondary matrix through its binary computer-like method, functioning to the screen further, to screen the further the data by comparison and reduce to its discrete two-dimensional form. Evaluation. To the extent that the gateway succeeds in bringing about a refinement and energy matrix of the mind, it succeeds in expanding or altering human consciousness so that it can perceive without recourse to the intercision of the physical senses, such as that evermore of the universal hologram, not of course accessible by sense of perception, can ultimately be perceived and understood. Marilyn Ferguson has written that the theories of the Prerum and Baum appear to account for all transcendental experience, paranormal events, and normal perceptual oddities. She goes on to say of Prerum, currently, he is proposing a startling, all-encompassing model that is generating considerable excitement among the intrigued by the mysteries of the human consciousness. His holographic model marries brain research to theoretical physics. It accounts for normal perception and simultaneously takes the paranormal and transcendental experiences out of the supernatural by explaining them as a part of nature. Like certain strange discoveries of quantum physics, the radical reorientation of this theory suddenly makes sense of paradoxical saying of mystics throughout the ages. Self-cognition. To complete our outline of the process which the mind achieves and exercises consciousness, we must also describe the mechanism which accounts for the aspect of human thought that differentiates it from the consciousness of plants or animals, i.e., self-cognitions. Humans not only know, but they know that they know. They are able to monitor the process of their own thinking and maintain an awareness of it. Moreover, they can conduct a comparative assessment, evaluating the function of their thought processes against various objective standards they have adopted. Human consciousness can do this because it has the capacity to duplicate aspects of its own hologram, project them out, perceive that the projection, put it through comparison with the memory aspect where its evaluation standards of measures are stored, of its own hologram, and measure or sense differences using three-dimensional geometry and in binary go-no-go pulse to yield verbal cognition about the self. Time-space dimensions. Up to this point, our discussion of the gateway process has been relatively simple and easy to follow. Now the fun begins. Gateway involves more than just perception of those aspects in the universal hologram, which can be accessed in dimension of time and space as we know it. To explain how and why human consciousness can be brought to transcend the limitations of time-space is the next task which we must be addressed. To do this, we must first appreciate that time and space are in order to understand how the dimension that they constitute can be transcended. Physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. In other words, it is a measurement of change. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern, so that its confinement gives it the capacity for some sort of, or for being contained at a specific location, which is distinguishable from other locations, space. Energy, which is not confined, is force without limit, without dimension, without limits of form. It is infinity, cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity, and it is therefore outside of dimension of time. It is also beyond space because that concept implies that the specific energy of this is limited to a specific location and is absent from other locations. But if energy is in a state of infinity, there are no boundaries, no here to differentiate from there, no sense of area. Energy in infinity means energy uniformly extended without limit. It has no beginning, no end, no location. It is conscious force, the fundamental primal power of existence without form, a state of infinite being. Energy in infinity is said to be completely at rest and therefore cannot generate holograms so long as it remains utterly inactive. It retains its inherent capacity for consciousness in that it can receive and passively perceive holograms generated by energy in motion out of the various dimensions which make up the created universe, but it cannot be perceived by consciousness operating in the active universe. Energy in this state of inactive infinity is termed by physicists as energy in its absolute state, or simply the absolute. Between the absolute and the material universe, in which we experience our physical existence, are various interweaving dimensions to which human consciousness in altered states may begin to gain access. Theoretically, human consciousness may continue to expand the horizons of its perceptual capability until it reaches the dimension of absolute, at which point perception stops because the absolute generates no holograms of or about itself. Intervening dimensions. Since the absolute is conscious energy in infinity, i.e., without boundaries, it occupies every dimension to include the time-space dimension which we have our physical existence, but we cannot perceive it. It overlays everything, as do many of the interweaving gradients of our dimension, through which energies of the universe pass on their way to and from their home in a state of infinity, the absolute. To enter in intervening dimensions, human consciousness which must focus such intense coherence that the frequency of the energy pattern which comprises the consciousness, i.e., brainwave output, can accelerate to a point where the resulting frequency pattern, if displayed on an oscilloscope, would virtually look like solid line. Achievement of this state of altered consciousness sets the stage for perception of non-time-space dimension because of the operation of the principle in physics known as Planck's distance. This is the aspect of quantum mechanics which applies the fact that any oscillating frequency, such as a brainwave, reaches 2 points of completely rest, which constitute the boundaries of each individual oscillation, i.e., movement up or down. Without these points of rest, an oscillation pattern would be impossible, since the points of rest required to permit the energy to change direction and thus continue vibrating between rigid limits. But it is also true that when, for an infinitesimally brief instant, that energy reaches one of 2 points of rest and clicks out of time space and joins infinity. See Exhibit 3, next page, and I'll go ahead and show that. So it's basically showing here that you have a state of infinity, the absolute, and that at its state of rest it reaches this point of infinity, clicks out, and Monroe often used the term click when he would go out of body or phase out. So I find this pretty interesting, the connection here. Let's jump on back. Let's see here. All right. Well, change direction, clicks out of time space, joins infinity. The critical step about time space occurs when the speed of the oscillation drops below 10 to negative 33 centimeters per second, Planck's distance. To use the words of Bentov, quantum mechanics tell us that the distances go below the Planck's distance, which is 10 to the 33 centimeters. We enter, in effect, a new world. To return to our case in point, the human consciousness wave pattern reaches such high frequency that the pattern of clickouts comes so close together that there is virtual continuity in it. Then a portion of that consciousness is actually postulated to establish and maintain its information collection function in those dimensions located outside between time space and the absolute. Thus, at the almost continuous click-out pattern, the establishment itself in continuous phase at speeds below Planck's distance, but before reaching the state of total rest, human consciousness passes through the looking glass of time-space after the fashion of Alice beginning her journey into Wonderland. The gateway experience, with its associated hemisync technique, is apparently designed, if used systematically and patiently, to enable human consciousness to establish a coherent pattern of perception in those dimensions where speeds below Planck's distance apply. This holds true irrespective of whether the individual is exercising his consciousness while his physical body, or whether he is doing so after having separated that consciousness from the physical body, i.e., the so-called out-of-body state mentioned earlier. Subatomic particles. Behavior of subatomic particles provides an interesting example of the phenomenon by clicking out, discussed in the preceding paragraphs in the article prepared for Science Digest magazine. Dr. John Gleedman mentions the way that which subatomic particles communicate with each other once their energy fields become entrained as a result of colliding with each other. The communication concerned is, of course, postulated by the occurring during the click-out phase in the oscillation of the energy fields comprised of subatomic particles concerned. It is this cause which accounts for the cross-communication at what, in terms of time-space velocities, would seem to involve speeds in excess of light. In reality, Einstein's theory of relativity is not being invalidated, but rather the communication concerned is taking place outside the dimension of time-space. to which the theory of relativity is strictly confined. Specifically, Dr. Gleedman tells us quantum theory postulates a kind of long-range Siamese twin effect. Whenever two subatomic particles collide and then go to their different ways, even when the particles are halfway across the universe from each other, it says that they instantaneously respond to each other's actions. And in doing so, they violate relativity's ban on faster-than-light velocities. Indeed, regarding attempts to quantify what is known about the behavior of energy in dimensions apparently outside of time-space, Bentov speaks about courageous physicists who are working on hypothetical particles called tachons, which can move at speeds higher than light. The speed of tachons starts just above the speed of light and ranges all the way to the infinite velocities. Dimensions in between. Now that we have postulated the legitimacy of assertion that energy forms which compose consciousness can move beyond the time-space dimension, we need to turn our attention to the energy forms which inhibit those dimensions between time-space and the absolute. In doing so, we may better perceive the form that reality assumes when we encounter it in those intermediate dimensions. In this context, Bentov tells us that the causal relationship between events breaks down. Movements become jerky rather than smooth. Time and space may become grainy or chunky. Perhaps a piece of space can be traversed by a particle in a matter in any direction without necessarily being synchronized with a piece of time. In short, a pair of events will occur in either time or space. The pair will not be connected casually, but by random fluctuation. What Bentov means is that inside the dimension of time-space, where both concepts apply in generally uniform way, there is a proportional relationship between them. A certain space can be covered by energy moving in either particle or waveform. In certain time, assuming a specific velocity virtually anywhere in time-space universe. The relationship is neat and predictable. However, in the intermediate dimensions beyond time-space, the limitations imposed on energy to put it into a state of oscillating motion are not uniform as they are in a physical universe. A myriad of various distortions and incongruities are thus likely to be encountered, such that our nice, neat assumptions concerning the relationship between time and space as we know it in this dimension do not apply. But even more important, access is open to both past and future when dimension of current time-space is left behind. Special status out-of-body experience. Although human consciousness can, with enough practice, move beyond the dimension of time-space and interface with other energy systems and other dimensions, the entire process is appreciably enhanced if that consciousness can be detached in large measures from the physical body. Before such interface is attempted, once the individual becomes proficient in the technique of out-of-body movement and then reaches the point where he is able to break out of the time-space while out of his body, he gains the advantage of clicking out part of his enhanced consciousness, while starting from a base located much closer to the dimension with which he uses to communicate. In other words, since he is starting from a point much higher up, to use the analogy from the time-space context, that part of his consciousness involved in clicking out will have that much more time to interact in dimensions beyond time-space, because less time is required to traverse the intervening layers. Moreover, once the individual is able to project his consciousness beyond time-space, that consciousness would logically tend to entrain its frequency output with the new energy environment to which it is exposed, therein greatly enhancing the extent to which an individual's altered consciousness modified to achieve a much heightened point of focus and a much more refined oscillating pattern. As a result, a self-reinforcing process should ensue whereby the farther consciousness in out-of-body state can be projected beyond the time-space dimension, the more its level of energy output would be enhanced. thus promoting the potential for still further travel. The tentative conclusion is to be drawn is that the out-of-body state may be regarded as an extremely effective way of accelerating the process of enhancing consciousness and of interfacing with dimensions beyond time-space. If the practitioner of the gateway technique has a choice of concentrating on achieving and exploiting the out-of-body experience as opposed to concentrating his full efforts on expanding his consciousness exclusively from physical base, the former would appear to promise much faster and more impressive successes than does the latter. Absolute in perspective. It may be helpful at this point to pause and recap. The major aspects of our intellectual journey from time-space to the realm of absolute. We have spoken at some length concerning the incredibly complex hologram which is created by the intersection of energy patterns generated in the totality of all dimensions with the universe, time-space included. We have noted that our minds constitute energy fields which interact with various aspects of the hologram to deduce information which is ultimately processed through the left hemisphere of our brain to reduce it to a form that we employ for the process we call thinking. We have implied that this hologram is the finite embodiment in active energy form of infinite consciousness of the Absolute. It is the title we assign to the vast pool of energy in a state of perfect rest, over which the physical universe is layered, and from whence it comes. Incidentally, it is to describe this, Bentov uses the analogy of the very deep sea, comparing the still depths of the sea to the dimension of the absolute, while assigning the storm-tossed waves above to represent the physical universe with which we are familiar. Slightly agitated currents of the sea to be found in between the turbulent surface and the totally still depths represent energy in the process of either going into rest, i.e. approaching infinity, or coming out of rest. From Big Bang to torus. Working from widely accepted Bang theory, or Big Bang theory, Bentov presents a conceptual model to depict the process of time-space, the relative position of universal hologram. The hologram is often called a torus, because it is thought to have overall shape and an immense self-contained spiral, biasing his thesis on recent studies concerning the distribution of quasars, quasi-stellar objects, and operating the premise that in the universe smaller processes tend to mirror images of larger ones, i.e. the pattern of electrons around the nucleus of an atom mirrors the way planets orbit their suns, and so on. Bentov postulates the following scenario, taking his cue from the observed capability of the quasars to eject enormously concentrated beams of matter from their interiors in a controlled non-concentric version of the Big Bang. He envisages a similar process occurring in the generation of the universe. Exhibit 4. See next page. So he's showing a quasar here, jetting out matter, basically showing that it's a loop back into itself. And the idea of the torus here, a self-contained interlocking spiral, kind of oscillating within itself. Noting that these galaxies located on the north of our own galaxy are moving away faster than those located in the south, and that those to the east and west are demonstrably more distant. Bentov regards this as substantive evidence that the jet of matter which is expanded into our universe has turned back upon itself, eventually forming an ovoid or egg shape. He sees matter in our universe entering the ovoid pattern following the ejection from a nucleus composed of an extremely compressed energy through the white hole at the end of its trip to the far end of the ovoid. He sees it departing via black hole in such a model. Time is observed to be a measure of the change at which occurs. The energy evolves into new, more complex forms, and it progresses along the distance from white hole side of the nucleus around the shell to this cosmic egg form, into cosmic egg, until it enters a black hole. In other words, as energy expelled from infinity and confined within the limits of conscious and absolute achieves form and motion, allowing ejection from the white hole at the top of the egg, the time begins as a measure of the cadence of this evolutionary movement as reality goes around the shell and the egg on its journey back to the black hole at the far end. It's kind of representing the idea of as above, so below, which is in a lot of, occult teachings, teaching that, it kind of explained it as atoms work, so our planetary systems work. Our place in time. The observed distribution of galaxies suggests that our particular universe is located near the top of the egg to the point where matter begins to fall back on itself, thus explaining the reason why the galaxies to the north seem to moving away more rapidly as they are caught up in the downturn of the stream of matter towards the far end of the cosmic egg. See Exhibit 5, next page. It shows it there. Exhibit 5. Layered over this cosmic egg is the absolute, which sustains the radiating nucleus from which the original jet matter issued forth. As the stream of matter moves around the ovoid towards its destination at the black hole, where it, gotta sneeze. Will be reabsorbed into the radiating nucleus, and then the absolute, it generates the interference pattern within the cosmic egg, which constitutes the universal hologram of torus. Since the torus is being simultaneously generated by matter in all various phases of time, it reflects the development of the universe in the past, present, and future, as it would be seen from our particular perspective in one phase of time. By reflecting on this model, it becomes possible to see how human consciousness, brought to a sufficiently altered focused state, could attain universal hologram, or could attain information concerning the past, present, and future, since all exist in universal hologram simultaneously. In the case of the future, because all of the consequences of the past and present can be seen coming together in the hologram, such as the future can be predicted, seen with total accuracy. Moreover, it is possible to see that the implosion of energy patterns would cross and recross to create the incredibly complex four-dimensional hologram or torus in a spiral shape, reflection of the multidimensional developing pattern of evolution. All of the movements of the energies which comprise the universe leave their mark and hence tell their story throughout time. Quality of consciousness. We noted earlier that the out-of-body state involves projection of a major portion of the energy that represents human consciousness so that it may move either freely throughout the terrestrial sphere for purpose of information and acquisition or into other dimensions outside of time-space, perhaps to interact with other forms of consciousness within the universe. Consciousness is the organizing and sustaining principle that provides the impetus and guidance to bring and keep energy in motion while given a set of parameters so that the specific reality will result. When consciousness reaches a state of sophistication in which that it can perceive itself, its own hologram, it reaches the point of self-cognition. Human beings have this form of elevated consciousness, as does the absolute, but in the case of the latter, it is the function of energy and its associated quality of consciousness in the infinity, omniscience and omnipotence and perceptual unity. When energy returns to a state of total rest within the absolute, it returns to the continuum of consciousness and the pool of limitless, timeless perception that resides there. Thus, the more complex an energy system in the material state, the more consciousness it possesses to maintain its reality. Our consciousness, therefore, is that differentiated aspect of universal consciousness which resides within the absolute. It accounts for the organization of the energy pattern which constitute our physical body, but is distinctly separate and superior to it. Since consciousness exists quite apart from and outside of reality, beyond the bounds of time-space, it, like the absolute, has neither beginning nor end. Reality has both a beginning and an end because it is bounded within the time-space. But with the fundamental quantum of energy and its associated consciousness is eternal. When the reality ends, it is its constituent energy simply returns to infinity in the absolute. Consciousness in perspective. Having ascertained that human consciousness is able to separate from physical reality and interact with other intelligence in other dimensions within the universe, and that it is both eternal and destined for ultimate return to the absolute, we are faced with the question, so what happens then? Since memory is a function of consciousness and therefore enjoys the same eternal character as the consciousness which accounts for its existence, it must be admitted that when consciousness returns to the absolute, it brings with it the memories that it has accumulated through experience in reality. The return of consciousness to the absolute does not imply an extinction of the separate entity which the consciousness organized and sustained in reality. Rather, it suggests differentiated consciousness which merges with and participates in a universal consciousness and infinity of the absolute without losing separate identity and accumulated self-knowledge with its memories confer upon it. What it does lose is the capability for generation of independent thought holograms, since that it can be done only in energy and motion. In other words, it retains the power to perceive but loses the power of will or choice. In exchange, however, this consciousness participates in the all-knowing infinite continuum of consciousness which is the characteristic of energy in the ever-present. Consequently, it is accurate to observe that when a person experiences an out-of-body state, he is in fact projecting that eternal spark of his consciousness and memory, which constitutes the ultimate source of his identity, to let it play in and learn from dimensions both inside and outside of time-space world, in which its physical component currently enjoys a short period of reality. And just showing, again, figure 5 from earlier, showing kind of our position in this torus. Gateway method. Having put the gateway experience into context by postulating a structural outline of how and why it seems to work, and having shown what it is designed to achieve, the time has come to examine the specific techniques which comprise the gateway training process. These techniques are designed to enable the user of the gateway tapes to manipulate the high energy states which can be achieved if the user continues to work with the tapes over a period of time. The amount of time required to achieve or to reach advanced energy states and to fully exploit the techniques varies with the individual, the sensitivities of his nervous system, his general state of mind, and the extent to which he may have previously developed facility in related techniques such as transcendental meditation are all pertinent factors affecting the speed at which one may expect to progress. The gateway process begins by teaching an individual participant to isolate extraneous concerns in a visualization device called an energy conversion box. Next, the participant is introduced to a method encouraging his mind and body to strive to achieve a state of resonance through the utterance of a single word or a single tone, a monotonous, protracted human humming sound that sets up feeling of vibration, particularly in the head. He engages in this resonant tuning, as it is called, by humming along with the chorus of such sounds that are contained on the gateway tape. Following this, the participant is exposed to the gateway affirmation and is encouraged to repeat it to himself as he hears it repeated on the tape. This affirmation is a statement to the effect that the individual realizes he is more than merely a physical body and he deeply desires to expand his consciousness. Hemisync introduced. After that, he is exposed for the first time to the hemisync sound frequencies and is encouraged to focus and develop a perception of an appreciation for those feelings which accompany the synchronization of brainwaves that result. Next comes technique of progressive and systematic physical relaxation while the hemisync frequencies are expanded to include additional forms of pink and white noises designed to put the physical body at a virtual threshold of sleep, as well as to calm the left hemisphere of the mind while raising the right hemisphere to create a heightened attentiveness. Once all of this is achieved, the participant is invited to envision creation of an energy balloon comprised of energy flow beginning at the center of the top of the head and extending down to in all directions to the feet. The energy involved in this flow proceeds up through the body and back out into the balloon pattern again. The energy balloon, which sets up the pattern very reminiscent of the cosmic egg discussed earlier, not only enhances bodily energy flow and encourages early achievement of suitable resonant state, but it also is designed to provide protection against conscious entities possessing lower energy level, which the participant might encounter in the event that he achieves an out-of-body state. It serves as a precautionary purpose in the unlikely event that the participant's first out-of-body experience involves a direct projection outside the terrestrial sphere. Advanced techniques. Having reached focus 10, the participant is now ready to endeavor and achieve the state sufficiently expanded awareness to begin actually interacting with dimensions beyond those associated with his experience of physical reality. This state is called focus 12 and involves conscious efforts in his part, while additional forms of pink and white noise enter the sound stream being directed into the ears from the gateway tape. Once the participant has achieved this state of greatly expanded awareness, he is ready to begin employing a series of specific techniques or tools. As the Monroe Institute characterizes them, each enable him to manipulate his newly found expanded awareness to obtain practical, useful feedback of value for promoting self-discovery and personal growth. The specific technique involved are described individually below. Problem solving. This technique involves identifying fundamental problems with the individual wishes to see something with his perception of these problems and then projecting them out into the universe. In this way, the individual enlists the assistance of what Monroe calls his higher self. In other words, his expanded consciousness to interact with the universal hologram to obtain information required to solve the problem. This approach may be used to solve personal difficulties and technical problems in the realm of physics, mathematics, etc., practical administrative problems, and so on. Responses to the problem-solving technique may be received almost immediately, but often they come based on developing intuition over the next 2 or 3 days. Frequently, the response comes in the form of a sudden holistic perception in which the individual suddenly finds that he simply knows the answer in all of its ramifications and completely in context, sometimes without even being able to put his newly found perception into words, at least initially. In some cases, the response may even arrive in the form of visual symbols, which the individual will see with his mind while he is in focus 12 state, and which will have to interpret after he returns to normal consciousness. Patterning. This technique involves the use of consciousness to achieve the desired objectives in the physical, emotional, or intellectual sphere. It involves concentration on the desired objective while in focus 12 state, extension of the individual's perception of that objective into whole expanded consciousness and its projection into the universe with the intention that desired objective is already a matter of established achievement, which is destined to be realized within the time frame specified. This particular methodology is based on the belief that the thought patterns generated by our consciousness in a state of expanded awareness create holograms which represent the situation we desire to bring out, and in doing so establish the basis for actual realization of that goal. Once the thought-generated hologram of the sought-after objective is established in the universe, it becomes an aspect of reality which interacts with the universal hologram to bring about the desired objective, which might not, under the circumstances, ever occur. Might not, under other circumstances, ever occur. In other words, the techniques of patterning recognizes the fact that since consciousness is the source for all reality, our thoughts have the power to influence the development of reality in time-space as it applies to us, for those thoughts can be projected with adequate intensity. However, the more complicated the objective sought, the more radically it departs from our current reality, the more time the universal hologram will need to reorient our reality sphere to accommodate our desires. Monroe trainers caution against attempting to force the pace of these process because the individual could succeed in dislocating his existing reality with drastic consequences. Color breathing. The next technique is called color breathing and is designed to use the expanded awareness and highly focused attentiveness associated with focus 12, the state, to imagine various colors in particularly intense and vivid manner so as to use them to resonate with and in turn activate the body's own energies. Fundamentally, in terms of practical application, it is a healing technique which is designed to restore the body and enhance its physical capabilities by balancing, revitalizing, and retuning the bodily energy flows. It is predicated on the principle that the body's electromagnetic field is capable of altering its resonance pattern so as to entrain energy from the Earth's electromagnetic field for its own use. The various colors envisioned in the imagination as part of the technique cue the mind as to which frequencies and what specific amplitudes are desired in connection with the entrainment and the subsequent alterations in body energy flow patterns. That color has the capacity to affect the human mind as well, and effectively of color in certain kinds of healing is a demonstrable fact. For example, application of the intense blue light to an area of the physical tumescence leads to the relatively rapidly and easily observable reduction in swelling, while red, and to a lesser extent yellow, have quite the opposite effect. However, in hemisync application of the technique, external light sources are not involved. Rather, the mind is the sole agent of the healing and revitalization. Energy bar tool. Magic wands and enchanted scepters have been a part of the folklore and the occult practice for many cultures. The scepters, staves, and maces carried by monarchs and high priest alike core with frequency in history of bygone eras as to suggest that at the very least these are items, aspects of some type of archetypal symbol which the human mind seems to appreciate, perhaps quite subliminally. In the case of energy bar tools, some technique involves envisioning a small, intensely pulsating dot of light in which the participant charges in his imagination with enormous energy until it is virtually pulsating. The participant then extrudes the dot into a shape of sparkling, vibrating cylinder of energy, which he then uses to channel force from the universe and to selected parts of his body for purposes of healing and revitalization. Remote viewing. In addition to the energy bar tool, is used as a portal for initiating a follow-on technique called remote viewing. In this context, the participant turns his bar of energy into a whirling vortex to which he sends his imagination in search of new illuminating insights. The apparent purpose of the symbolism involved in the vortex seems to be a cue to the subconscious and convey to it instructions as what the participant wishes to do, but in terms of nonverbal symbols which the right hemisphere of the mind is capable of understanding. Living body map. This technique provides an amplification for the application of the energy bar tool as a means of healing specific areas of systems of the human body. The configuration of the participant's body is imagined, and various major systems such as the nervous and circulatory systems are envisioned in appropriate colors within the confines of the outline being held in the imagination. The energy bar tool is then applied to energizing, balancing, and healing whatever manner participant desires. In the process, the participant visualizes various systems of colored energy flowing out of the tool into the organ, system, or area upon which revitalizing or healing application is being made. Since colors are the result of different wavelengths of light, which is to say energy is at various frequencies, this technique operates on the assumption that the human body is composed of energy and can be vitalized and healed through the additive application of additional energy, provided that the energy is applied in the appropriate form. Focus 15. Travel into the past. All of the preceding techniques are conducted at a level of expanded awareness known as Focus 12. However, the technique of time travel into the past involves further expansion of consciousness through the inclusion of an additional levels of sound and hemisync tapes. Some of the sound is probably merely an intensification of the basic hemisync frequencies being designed to further modify the brainwave frequency and amplitude. Other aspects of the added sound patterns appear to have been designed to provide subtle, almost subliminal suggestions to the mind as what is desired to be a way of further expanding consciousness, so as to support the verbal suggestions and instructions also contained in the tape. Even the instructions are highly symbolic, with time being visualized as a huge wheel in the universe, with various spokes, each of which give access to different part of the participant's past. Focus 15 is a very advanced state and is extremely difficult to achieve. Probably less than 5% of all participants in any given gateway experience actually fully achieve the Focus 15 state during the course of the approximately 7 days of training. Nonetheless, Monroe Institute trainers affirm that with practice, eventually Focus 15 can be achieved. They also state that not only the individual's past history is available for examination by one who has achieved Focus 15, but other aspects of the past with which the individual himself had no connection may also be accessed. Focus 21, the future. The last and most advanced of all the focus states associated with Gateway Training program involves the movement outside of boundaries of time and space in Focus 15, but with the attention to discovering the reached truly advanced level. Except in the unusual circumstance, it is probably not attainable except by those who have conditioned themselves through long application, meditation, or by those who have practiced long years and hard through the use of hemisync tapes for a period of months, if not years. Out-of-body movement. This is a remarkable phenomenon that has been saved for the discussion in detail until last, because the interest which it occasions and special circumstances involved in its attainment. Monroe Institute stresses that the Gateway Program is not established solely for the purpose of enabling participants to attain the out-of-body state, nor does the program guarantee that most participants will succeed in doing it during the course of training at the Institute. Only one tape out of the many which make up the Gateway experience is devoted to the techniques involved in out-of-body movement. Basically, these techniques are merely designed to make it easier for the individual to achieve the out-of-body state when his brainwave patterns and personal energy levels have reached a point that he is in apparent harmony with his surrounding electromagnetic environment, such as he feels that he has reached the threshold where separation is a possibility. To facilitate achieving the out-of-body state, Bob Monroe, founder of the Monroe Institute, is quoted in a recent magazine article saying that in order to assist a participant in a particular hemisync tape concerned with that technique employs a beta signal around 2877.3 CPS cycles per second, since 30 to 40 cycles per second is considered to be the normal range for beta brainwave signals, those associated with wakeful state. It is apparent the Monroe Institute is convinced that the same heightened state of brainwave frequency output, which promotes altered states of consciousness, is also important consideration in assisting the achievement of out-of-body states. The actual techniques employed for separating from the body involve such simple maneuvers as rolling out, lifting out, after the fashion of a telephone pole, wherein the individual separates in a rigid head-first manner, such that he finds himself standing at attention at the foot of his physical body, and sliding out through either end of his body. Role of REM sleep. It is interesting to note that Bob Monroe informed the Gateway class that finished 7th of May 1983 that an ex-trainer of his operating in Charlottesville, Virginia, found that he could guarantee out-of-body movements by bringing participants down into the rapid eye movement state of sleep, and then use the hemisync tape technique. This may well be a function of the fact that most of, if not all, people repeatedly go into an out-of-body state during REM sleep. REM sleep is the deepest possible level of ordinary sleep and involves complete disengagement from the body's motor cortex function from the neck down, and nearly complete suppression of consciousness in the left brain hemisphere. The effect of this is to put the body in a state of complete stillness so far as the skeletal muscle structure is concerned, thereby further promoting the state of deep rest needed to eliminate the bifurcation echo. In addition, it leaves the right hemisphere of the brain free to respond to the instructions and suggestions contained in the gateway tape. However, the use of hemisync tapes at this point may be less a factor in actually achieving the out-of-body state than it's a matter of focusing the brain enough so that a residual memory of having a naturally achieved out-of-body state is carried into the waking state. Indeed, it may be even postulated that some of the dreams associated with deep levels of sleep are in fact functions of the same kind of altered consciousness involved in interaction with the universe that plays a role in all of the focus 12, 15, and 21 states described above. The differences between these states and the condition of the mind in REM sleep seems to be that the left hemisphere is almost totally disengaged, and that the latter experience such that memory of what it achieved in the altered states of consciousness cannot usually be retrieved by conscious desire, because the left hemisphere had no knowledge of its existence or its location in the right hemisphere. Admittedly, some people can be trained to remember their REM state dreams through intense conditioning in that waking state, but even that may be more of a function of establishing pathways in the right hemisphere, which the left hemisphere can access following re-entry into the wakeful state, than it is an indication of any specific left hemisphere consciousness involvement in the process during REM sleep. In any event, the three apparent conditions required for voluntarily inducing an out-of-body state in most individuals seem to be achievement of a state of profound quiet in the body, such that bifurcation echo fades and resonant at approximately 7 hertz is established. 2. Synchronization of the two brain hemispheres wave patterns. And 3. Subsequent stimulation of the right hemisphere of the mind to attain a state of heightened alertness, which of course interferes with the brain hemisphere synchronization, but will not until a sufficient level of enhanced frequency range has been established to help achieve the out-of-body state. Belief system considerations. In 1967, Alexandra David Neal and Lima Yongdern wrote a book entitled Secret Oral Techniques, or Secret Oral Teachings in Tibetan Buddhist Sects, from which the following quote was taken. "The tangible world is movement, say the masters, not the collection of moving objects, but movement itself. There are no objects in movement. It is the movement which constitutes the objects which appear to us. They are nothing but movement. This movement is a continued and infinitely rapid succession of flashes of energy. In the Tibetan Saul or Shug, all objects perceptible to our senses, all phenomena of whatever kind and whatever aspect they assume, are constituted by a rapid succession of instantaneous events. The classic description of the universal hologram is to be found in Hindu Sutra, which says, in heaven of Indra, there is said to be a network of pearls so arranged that if you look at one, you see all, the others reflected in it. I have cited this quotation because it shows the conception of the universe, which at least some physicists are now coming to accept, is identical in its essential aspects with one known to the learned elite in the selective civilizations and the cultures of high attainment in the ancient world. The concept of the cosmic egg, for example, is well known to scholars familiar with the ancient writings of the Eastern religions. Nor are the theories presented in this paper at variance with the essential tenets of the Judeo-Christian stream of thought. The concept of visible reality, i.e. the created world, as being an emanation of an omnipotent and omniscient divinity who is completely unknowable in his primary state of being. The absolute at rest in infinity is a concept straight out of the Hebrew metaphysical or mystical philosophy. Even the Christian concept of the Trinity shines through the description of the absolute as presented in this paper. The description of energy totally at rest in infinity fits the Christian metaphysical concept of the Father, while the infinite self-consciousness resident in the energy providing the motive force of will bring a portion of that energy into motion to create reality constitutes with the Son. This is so because in order to attain self-consciousness, the consciousness of the Absolute must project a hologram of itself and then perceive it. That hologram is a mirror image of the Absolute in infinity. Still exists outside of time and space, but is one step removed from the Absolute and is actual agent of all creation, all reality. And the eternal thought or concept of self which results from this self-consciousness serves thee. Okay. I guess there's something missing here. Yeah, so there's 35 and 36 are missing. All right. Motivational aspect. In this step procedure, which involves repetitive practice and techniques concerned, using each new insight as a means of penetrating further during the next practice session. But as the rate of progress is so much faster with the gateway approach than it is with transcendental meditation or other forms of mental self-discipline, and its horizons seem to be much wider, that the discipline needed to practice it would seem to be within the means of even the impatient, result-oriented, skeptical, pragmatist, or of our society. Unlike yoga and all other forms of Eastern mental discipline, Gateway does not require the infinite patience and total personal subservience to the faith in a system of discipline designed to absorb all the individual's energy over most of a lifetime. Rather, it will begin to produce at least minimal results within a relatively short time, such that enough feedback is available to motivate and energize the individual to continue working with it. Indeed, the speed with which an individual may expect progress seems less a function of a number of hours spent practicing them. It is a question of the speed at which he or she is able to use the insights gained to release anxieties and stresses within both the mind and body. These points of energy blockages seem to provide principal barriers to achieve and enhance energy states and focus of mind needed for rapid progression. The more compulsive, the more uptight the individual may be at the outset, the more barriers he or she will inherently or initially encounter to achieving deep, immediate experience. But as the insights begin to come and the blockages begin to dissolve, the way ahead becomes increasingly clear, and the value of the gateway moves from status of a matter of intellectual assessment to one of personal experience. Conclusion. There is a sound, rational basis in terms of physical science parameters for considering gateway to be plausible in the terms of essential objectives. Intuitional insights of not only personal but a practical and professional nature would seem to be within the bounds of reasonable expectations. However, a phased approach for entering the gateway experience in an accelerated mode would seem to be required if the time needed to reach advanced states of altered consciousness is to be brought within more manageable limits of the standpoint of establishing an organization-wide exploitation of gateway's potential. The most promising approach suggested in the foregoing study involves the following steps. Begin by using gateway hemisync tapes to achieve enhanced brain focus and to induce hemisphere synchronization. Then add strong REM sleep frequencies to induce left brain quiescence and deep physical relaxation. Provide hypnotic suggestion designed to enable individuals to induce a deep auto-hypnotic state as well. Use auto-hypnotic suggestion to attain much enhanced focus of concentration and motivation in rapidly progressing through Focus 12 exercises. Then repeat steps A and B following the use of auto-hypnotic suggestions that an out-of-body movement will occur and be remembered. Repeat step E to achieve facility in gaining out-of-body state under conscious control. Alter hypnotic suggestion to stress ability to consciously control out-of-body movement and maintain it even after REM sleep state ends. Approach Focus 15 and 21 objectives, escape from time, space, and interact. Interact within new dimensions from out-of-the-body perspective. Use multi-focused approach to solve problem and of distortion and terrestrial information gathering trips. This approach involves the use of 3 individuals in the out-of-body state, one viewing the target object here in time space, one viewing at Focus 15 as it slips into the immediate past, and one viewing as Focus 21 as it slips from the immediate future. Debrief all 3 and compare data gathered from the 3 points of view. If care is taken to ensure that all three go out of body together in the same environment, their consciousness energy systems could resonate in sympathetic oscillation. They can tune in to the same target on a different plane, dimensions, with greater effectiveness. Encourage pursuit of all self-knowledge by all individuals involved in the following experiments to enhance objectivity in out-of-body observation and thinking, and to remove personal energy blockages likely to retard rapid progress. Be intellectually prepared to react to possible encounters with intelligent non-corporeal energy forms when the time-space boundaries are exceeded. arranged to have groups of people in Focus 12 state unite their altered consciousness to build holographic patterns around sensitive areas to repulse possible unwanted out-of-body presences. Encourage more advanced gateway participants to build holographic patterns of successful attainment and rapid progress for advanced colleagues to assist them in progressing through the gateway systems. If these experiments are carried through, it is to be hoped that they will truly find a gateway to gateway and realm of practical application for the whole system of techniques which comprise it. And then it just gives a list of references here. So, this is our U.S. military and CIA looking into these practices. They say they stopped work on it. Now, I personally have delved into these practices myself, just from my own volition. I was drawn to it, and I have been able to perceive for myself very strange states of consciousness. There's a lot of naysayers and a lot of people that chalk it up to straight woo-woo, but I think this document itself pretty well dismisses all of that nonsense. It brings it out of the occult, out of the mystic, into a much more feasible, practical way of looking at it. And I think this is a great service to humanity, honestly, and all those that seek a higher states of consciousness, out-of-body experience, seeking the absolute or God, because the absolute is often used in mystical teachings, the one, the all, the absolute, and everything in this is pretty reflective of the path of many people that seek this stuff, and it leaves at the wayside all the nonsense BS that comes along with it. So, I hope you've enjoyed listening to this. This was a great find, and I've been a fan of Robert Monroe's for a good while, and his writings are some of the best to be had. And if you haven't read his works, he's got a trilogy: Journeys Out of the Body, Far Journeys, and The Ultimate Journey. They're wonderful books, and I definitely recommend them to anyone. And also look into Robert Monroe. He died many years ago, and the Monroe Institute is no longer what it once was. And I personally don't have any allegiance to them or anything, but this really has a deep look into what it used to be in the 80s. So I think I'm going to wrap it up on that, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I'd love to talk about this, and if you have any questions, please feel free to address me. I'd like to find more of these works, like into the Project Stargate and just many of the other government operations that took place regarding these experiments. And I guess I'll end it on this. If our government of CIA military have looked into these practices, there must be some validity to it. They've looked into a lot of crazy things throughout the years, but this is a well-written report, and I think it's worth a read for yourself. Like I said, I'll leave the link in the description or a comment, and I think that's it, guys. Thanks for listening. Much love, and we will all talk soon. Peace out.